Hi everyone, today I'm going to show you how I make this Minion Batman cake. So the tools and equipment that you'll need I'm using three 6-inch round chocolate cakes, and one of them I've just carved around the edge on the top to give it the domed effect for the top of the head. And then you'll need a sharp serrated knife, an angled palette knife, and this is the board I use for buttercreaming cakes, and a Lazy Susan. And I've also got 1200 grams of buttercream. So first of all, I just put the cling film on the unit so when I cut the cake it catches all the bits, and then using your sharp knife just level the cake. I do find when they come out of the oven they're quite domed on the top, so I like to level them off. Put the cake to one side, use it for cake pops later on, and then just slice it again until it's completely level. Just get down to the unit and check it's level, and then once you're happy with it, cut it in half and put a slice in the edge of the cake. I do that so that when I put the layers back together I know where to put them, and I'm just carving off a little bit more around the top of the cake to give it the domed effect. And then slice it in half, and then put in a little cut in the side for when the layers go back together. And then I'm placing some anti-slip on the Lazy Susan, and place your first layer of cake on the cake board and add some buttercream. And what I do is I put a little bit of buttercream on the board where I've put the slice in the cake to make it easier for putting the layers back together. And just put plenty on and smooth it out as flat as you can, and then put your next layer on, squash it down, and some more buttercream. I've used 800 grams of icing sugar, 400 grams of butter, 50 grams of sifted cocoa powder, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract for the buttercream. And then just keep going, stack all your layers until you've got to the top, and then cover the whole cake with a good thick layer of buttercream. Once you've covered the cake with buttercream, what I do is I get my bench scraper, dip it in hot water, very hot water, and just scrape round. The heat on the bench scraper, because it's metal, just helps with smoothing it off, makes it much easier. Go around as high up as you can, and because it's a domed cake, I'm just using my spatula just to finish off the top, dipping it in the hot water again. Doesn't matter if you get a little bit of water on the cake, because that will just dry out while it's in the fridge setting. And once you've covered it all and smoothed it as much as you can, just tip the bits off of the Lazy Susan onto the cling film, and then just remove the cling film from your work surface, and it makes for a much cleaner, tidier work surface. Once you've covered all your cake, just place it in the fridge for about 30 minutes. So this is my dressed cake drum. So what I've done is I've covered it in grey fondant, and I've given it a cobbled effect, put a ribbon around the edge and a yellow and black bow, and then let it set for about 3 or 4 days. How I got the cobbled effect was using my PME impression mat. While the fondant is soft, just place the impression mat and then roll it with your rolling pin, move it along to the centre and then to the right until it's all impressioned. And then if you want a deeper impression, just take your veining tool and run it along the lines till you've got the effect that you want. And then this is the cake. It's been in the fridge for, like I say, about 30 minutes, and what I like to do is just Smooth it down, make sure there's no jagged edges on the buttercream, so using the heat from my hands just to rub around, gently smoothing it all down. It just makes for a better finish on your fondant, and your fondant will be smoother as well. So put your cake to one side, take your cake board, and then I'm going to place it roughly there. So I'm going to put some buttercream on the cake board to help the cake to stick. Just a thin layer, don't need too much. And then just put a little swiggle in the middle to help it dry and stick to the cake. Then just using my hands, gently lift up the cake and place it where you want it on the cake board. And just give it a final smooth. Ready to place the fondant. And then I'm taking my Lazy Susan with some anti-slip, placing the cake board on top so that I can easily work on the cake. And then I'm using a little bit of water and just damping down the cake, and this helps the fondant to stick on nicely. You might not have to do this, it does depend on the humidity in your kitchen. And then put the cake to one side, and now I'm just rolling out my yellow fondant. Now I pre-measured the cake before, and I need 19 inch by 6 inch to go all the way around. So it's roughly the right size, although it's a little bit short. I know that it will stretch quite a bit, so I'm okay with that, that'll be fine. So using my pizza cutter just to trim down the yellow fondant to the right size. And then move the excess to one side. And then I'm going to roll up the strip of fondant. As I'm going along, I'm sprinkling some corn flour, and this just stops it from sticking onto itself when I'm trying to put it back on the cake and unroll it. Does make it much easier. Then get your cake, and I'm starting at the back, and I'm just rolling out the fondant using my hands to stick it onto the cake and rub it down and smooth it on, and then just gently pulling and stretching so you get a nice finish. Using my hands just to pull it all the way around so that the seam and the joint is at the back of the cake, so nobody will see that. And then just gently use your hands to smooth on the fondant until it's all stuck down nicely. Then what I'm doing here is I'm just cutting out a 1 inch strip from the very bottom of the cake and also the top of the cake, and that's so that I've got enough room to place the Dungaree bottoms and the Batman mask. So I just use one clean cut all the way around, gently cutting, and then once I've cut all the way around, I just peel off the fondant and then smooth the edge of the fondant down and push it back onto the cake if it's come off a little bit. And this is how the cake looks once the yellow fondant has been trimmed. And then I like to just keep the board clean as I'm going along, so just use a pastry brush with a little bit of water to clean it off. And now I'm taking some black fondant and just rolling it out into a circle, and this is what I'm going to be using for the Batman mask. So cut out a circle. Now you can use a template here if you like, but I'm just using my eyeline. I'm just gauging the size that I need. And then take your cake and just place the black fondant on the top and allowing more at the front, because you need to have the V at the front for the Batman mask. It comes down into a V, a little point at the front. So I'm just allowing there for the V. and then smooth the black fondant on with your hand, rubbing it and smoothing it, and then take your sharp knife, and I'm just making a line at the moment where I want the point to go, just checking it's right, and once I'm happy it's in the right position, I'm just going to cut the excess black fondant off at the front, leaving the point, and then where the yellow and black fondant meet, I'm just trimming the excess off there. Now you may find you'll get some black marking on the yellow fondant, just use a little bit of water to wipe that off with a paintbrush. Then I've joined the edges together, the black and yellow edges, and I'm using my veining tool just to give it a final smooth and get that nice point at the front. And now I'm rolling out some black fondant, and I'm going to make a long strip using a little bit of corn flour again, and trimming it down using my pizza cutter. And this is what I'm going to put in the bottom of the cake for the bottom of the dungarees. Again, I'm rolling it up using a bit of corn flour to stop it from sticking to itself, make it easier to put on. And then where the seam is at the back for the yellow, just start there and then just gently rub it on using your thumb. All the way around until you get to where you started, and then trim off the excess and join the seam together. And then I'm just using my hand to smooth it down, make sure it's all smooth and neat, and that will also help get rid of the corn flour. And then I'm just taking a black oblong piece of fondant, and this is what I'm going to use to make the front of the dungarees. So I've got the cake in front of me, and I'm just using my eye line to look at it and see what size I want the dungaree front to be. There's no set format for this. You can use a template as well if that helps, but I just like to use my eye line. Then trim it down until you've got the right shape and size. And then once you're happy with that, just put a little bit of water on the left and right bottom side and put it against the cake to make sure it is the right size and it looks right. And then once you're happy with that, use a water stuck straight onto the cake and just gently stick the dungarees on. And using a little bit of water as you go along around the edges of the dungaree fronts until it's all stuck down nice and smooth, and then use the edge of your veining tool just to smooth out the edges and give a nice finish. And then I'm using an oblong of black fondant, and I'm just going to stick that onto the back centre of the cake for the back of the dungarees. And then I'm just taking some black fondant, rolling it out into a strip, trimming it down with my pizza cutter, and then once I've got the right shape and size, use a little bit of water starting at the front, stick it on and run it to the back, and then trim off any excess at the back. And just make sure it's nice and smooth and straight. And do the same for the other side, a little bit of water, not too much. And then trim down the strip if it's too thick. Starting at the front and then working all the way around to the back. And now I'm going to make the Minion mouth. I've rolled out the circle and then just using a sharp knife, again using my eye line to gauge the size of the mouth that I want. There's no set format on this, again just the size you like. You can use a template if you want. And then get some small balls of white fondant, and then I'm squashing them down into circles, cutting them in half and flipping them over and sticking them onto the mouth for the teeth. I'm doing 4 teeth at the top, so again make your circle, turn the teeth over and stick them on. The fondant is quite sticky, so I didn't need any water for this because it was so small. And then for the bottom I'm going to make 3 teeth just to give it a little bit of variation, and also the teeth are slightly smaller at the bottom. And then once you've got the right shape and size for the mouth, use a little bit of water and I'm going to stick it directly in the centre of the cake. And then using my veining tool just to turn down the corners of the mouth so that you've got the right type of frown. And this is how it's looking so far with the Batman mask, the dungarees and the mouth. Again I'm just cleaning off the board using a little bit of water. Don't worry about the water, it will completely dry out. And then I've made a Batman logo. So I just used a little template, cut out the Batman logo, stuck it on the yellow fondant and then let it set for a day or two, just to make it easier to work with. And then stick it on the front of the dungarees. And now I'm making the eyes. So roll out some white fondant for the whites of the eyes. Take the goggle and just press it down and then cut out the circle. The reason I do this is so that you get the right size to go immediately under the goggle and it fits together nicely. And then I'm rolling out some brown fondant. Just roll into 2 balls, squash it down with your finger till you've got the size that you need. And this is going to be stuck on the whites of the eyes. So using your palette knife to lift it off the board, use a little bit of water, stick it on, and I'm going to have the eyes looking slightly upwards. And then next 2 little black balls of fondant, squash them down and stick them on top of the brown, again looking slightly upwards. And then take a little small piece of white fondant, this will be very small, and cut it in half and make 2 tiny little balls to finish the eyes off. And then these are the Minion goggles I made earlier. I've made them about 4 days ago so they can set nice and firm. Just rolled out a piece of modelling paste, cut a circle through the middle and the outer, sprayed it with silver paint and then added the screw heads and the goggle holders on the side and let them set for a few days. They're nice and firm, ready to be placed on the cake. Then once I'm ready to put the goggles and the eyes on, I just put the goggles against the cake and push them on where I want to place the eyes, and that gives me the circle on the cake so I know exactly where to put the eyes, and it allows enough space for the goggles, which makes it easier to place. And then because the goggles are slightly heavier because they're made from modelling paste, I use a little tiny bit of edible glue. You don't need a lot at all, otherwise it'll be slider. Make sure your goggle strap holders on the outside, and then a tiny bit of edible glue is all you need to stick them on. And this is how it's looking so far with the goggles. And now I'm going to make the boots. So I'm just taking a ball of fondant, tapering it at the bottom for the heel of the boot, and then using my veining tool I'm going to draw in a little heel. And then what I do is I just put lots of little dots inside the heel to make it a little bit more realistic, looking like a used heel. And then keep modelling and shaping for the top end of the boot so you get that round fullness. Place it on the board and just work it until you've got the right shape. And once you've got the right shape, take your veining tool and just run a line all the way around the edge of the boot, giving the impression of the sole of the boot, and again making it look a little bit more realistic. And then just give it a final shape, make sure it's the right shape for what you want. Check it against the cake to make sure it's the right size, and then make a second one and put them to one side. Now I'm going to make the hands, so again using a ball of fondant, taper it at one end, put 2 slices in, and then use your fingers just to smooth them over at the edges until you get the right shape for the hand. Taper it at the wrist and then just trim it off. Again, make a second one and put it to one side. And now I'm making the Batman ears. So take a piece of black fondant, fairly thick, and then point it at the top, smooth it down, shape it, and at the bottom just taper it and squash it down a little bit, and then trim it with your palette knife. Again, make a second one and put them to one side. Now I'm making the legs, so take a chunky piece of black fondant, roll it into a sausage, cut it in half, and then just squash it and roll it into the shape of the legs. The legs are quite little, don't need any long legs, and quite short. And then once you've got the right shape, put them to one side, and then roll out a thin strip of yellow fondant, cut it in half for the arms. And then now I'm going to put all the pieces on, so just put a little bit of water on the back of the leg and the bottom of the leg to stick it onto the cake and the cake board. Again, do the same for the second one. Don't need too much water, just enough to hold it in place. It will dry out and be held in place firmly. And just check and move anything that you need to. And now you've got your legs. Then for the arms, I just thin it out at the top, put a little bit of water on and place it directly under the strap, and then gently onto the board. Get the hand, check it for size. If it's too big, just trim it down, and a little bit of water on the wrist and on the underneath to stick it to the arm and the cake board. Do the same with the other arm, thin it out at the top, little bit of water, place it directly under the strap, and on this one I'm just going to have it going out a little bit so it looks different to the other one. Check for size for the hand, and using a little bit of water, just stick it on to the wrist and the underneath so it sticks to the arm and the cake board. And this is how it's looking so far, really taking shape now. I'm going to stick the Batman ears on. Apologies that I've gone slightly out of shot here, but I just stuck them on and pointed them at the top so they were sticking up, and then moved them into position. Did the same with the other one. Don't need too much water, just enough to hold it. Gently stick it on, smooth it down at the bottom, make sure it's sticking up and pointed at the top. And now I'm going to make the goggle straps. So a little bit of black fondant, rolled out, trim it down using your pizza cutter, long enough to be the strap. And then I'm just checking for size. If it's a little bit long, just trim it down, makes it easier to work with. And then using a little bit of water, stick it on just under the goggle strap holder. From front to back, just smooth it on, and then trim off your excess using a sharp knife and push it into place. Smooth the edges with your finger and your veining tool, and then run a line down the centre from front to back. And then do the same on the other side. Little bit of water, push it slightly under the goggle strap holder, trim off the excess, smooth it down so it's nicely in place, and then using your veining tool just to smooth the edges and run a line down the centre from front to back. And then roll out a long strip of black fondant, cut it into shape the same thickness as the other two you've just made. This will be used for the back of the goggle strap. Just trim it down till you've got the right thickness. You want it the same thickness as the other two. And then a little bit of water, stick it on round the back so it's in line with the other two, so it looks like it's running all the way around. Trim off the excess and then just smooth it and shape it into place, and then using your veining tool just to give it that finishing edge and smoothness. And then run a line down the centre all the way around. I usually do it twice because that gives a nice deep indentation. And then I've rolled out a big piece of black fondant, and now I'm going to make the Batman cape. So just cut out a shape of a cape, remove the excess, and then I'm using a circle cutter just to make the bottom edge of the Batman cape. Keep going all the way along until it's all cut down, and then trim off any odd bits and smooth the edges with your fondant, and then lift it up. I've already put some water on the top of the cake to stick it on. This was actually my second attempt. The first attempt was too short and I wanted it to go all the way around so it could be seen from the left and the right, so I took the smaller one off and replaced it with this larger one. And then just stick it down on the edges, put a little bit of water on the board to help it stick on there as well to keep it in place. Make sure it's stuck down on the left and the right corners, and then use your veining tool just to pull out any pieces of the cape that need to be flared out a little bit more. And then I've used the edge of the handle of my paintbrush just to push it out a little bit more at the back. And then I've pre-cut out a yellow Batman logo. Again, I used a little template and just cut around it. Let it set for a few days just to make it easier to work with and stick on. Use a little bit of water to stick it on, and it looks like that on the back of the cape, which gives it a bit of colour and variation. And then I made two little yellow buttons with some black stitching on to finish off the front of the dungarees. Just push them into place. And then what I've done now, I've taken the cake off of the Lazy Susan, I've added the birthday message, and I'm just doing a little bit of cleaning up. And there you have the absolutely brilliant Batman Minion cake. A fabulous cake for any birthday. Looking really good. I do hope you found this tutorial helpful and useful. and thank you very much for watching. If you do want to see more tutorials from me, do subscribe. Bye bye.